follow-up question.
Yeah, please.
Fraud that you've been pointing out and talking about in Minnesota specifically. There have been some reports resurfacing and circulating, even by your own administration, alleging Ilhan Omar's marriage to her brother. And this would be a fraudulent situation. If there, in fact, is found to be fraud in a situation like that, would you like to see her denaturalized or others who have similarly committed?
Well, I think she's very bad for our country. All she does is complain, complain, complain. She comes out of a country where they have no government, they have no military, they have no police, they got no nothing. They don't have a country. And they run around killing each other. And then she comes over here, she tells the United States of America how it should be run. We don't want to hear from her. I don't want to hear from her. I don't want to speak for Emma, but I don't think Emma particularly wants to hear. But don't say it because I don't want to get you in trouble, okay? Just be nice and easy, all right? I'll do it for you, but that part I'll do. But I just want to say that there's nothing worse than a person.
Watching this footage is like witnessing the unmasking of fascism in real time. The way the rhetorical violence drips from every syllable. The way xenophobia becomes policy becomes permission to dehumanize. And what you just heard is not some aberration or momentary lapse of judgment from a deranged reality television president. This is the calculated architecture of white supremacy reassembling itself before our very eyes, in 2024 and beyond, deploying the oldest tricks in the authoritarian playbook with surgical precision, while half the country shrugs or applauds because we have been conditioned to accept the normalization of the unspeakable. Trump recently called Ilhan Omar garbage during a cabinet meeting, stating that Somalia stinks and declaring he doesn't want Somali immigrants in the United States, and this is happening right now in December 2024. This is not ancient history or some dystopian speculation. This is the sitting president of the United States using the full weight of his office to demonize a congresswoman who fled civil war as a child and earned her citizenship 25 years ago. The rhetorical escalation is breathtaking in its cruelty and chilling in its implications because Trump has been systematically attacking the Somali population in Minnesota, claiming that hundreds of thousands of refugees from Somalia are completely taking over the state, painting an entire community as invaders and thieves in language that echoes every genocidal propaganda campaign of the 20th century. What makes this moment so explosively dangerous is the convergence of multiple authoritarian impulses working in concert, the scapegoating of vulnerable minorities, the delegitimization of political opposition, the weaponization of fraud allegations to justify mass crackdown, and most terrifyingly of all, Trump has said he would absolutely denaturalize certain Americans, stating, "If I have the power to do it, I'm not sure that I do, but if I do I would denaturalize absolutely," which represents a fundamental assault on the permanence of citizenship itself. This is the kind of language that makes constitutional scholars wake up in cold sweats because Trump has repeatedly suggested he is open to denaturalizing Ilhan Omar, and when you understand that Stephen Miller has said denaturalization efforts will be supercharged in a second Trump term, you begin to grasp the systematic nature of what we are witnessing, the construction of a legal and rhetorical framework for stripping citizenship from naturalized Americans who dare to dissent, who dare to criticize, who dare to exist while Muslim or black or immigrant. And here is where it gets truly insidious, truly Orwellian in its manipulation of public fear, because Trump has seized on the fact that 59 people have been convicted on criminal charges relating to COVID relief fraud schemes in Minnesota, with most of East African descent, involving over $1 billion in taxpayer money, and he has weaponized these legitimate prosecutions into a wholesale condemnation of an entire ethnic and religious community. Trump declared that Somalians ripped off that state for billions of dollars, billions every year, billions of dollars, and they contribute nothing, which is textbook collective punishment rhetoric, the same logic that underlies every pogrom and ethnic cleansing campaign throughout history, the argument that because some members of a group committed crimes, the entire group deserves expulsion or worse. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz responded by calling Trump's rhetoric demonizing an entire community on the actions of a few, which is exactly correct but barely scratches the surface of how dangerous this moment truly is, because what Trump is doing is constructing a permission structure for violence, for discrimination, for the wholesale rejection of an entire community's humanity and belonging. Let us be absolutely clear about the historical precedents here, because they are not subtle, and they are not ambiguous, and anyone who has studied the rise of fascism in the 20th century recognizes these patterns immediately. Harvard professor Stephen Levitsky, author of How Democracies Die, calls Trump's rhetoric really classic authoritarian discourse, citing examples from 1930s Europe and 1960s Latin America, where autocrats used exactly this language, There's an enemy within that's more dangerous than our external enemies, and that justifies the use of extra-constitutional measures. This is not hyperbole. This is not Trump derangement syndrome. This is sober historical analysis from experts who have devoted their entire careers to understanding how democracies collapse, and they are sounding the alarm bells at maximum volume, while too many Americans remain in a state of dangerous complacency or willful ignorance. Critics argue that Trump's communication style borrows from authoritarian playbooks, citing his use of scapegoating, appeals to nationalism, and rhetorical attacks on the media, while supporters view his rhetoric as refreshing and detractors contend it erodes democratic norms and fuels divisiveness. But this both sides framing fundamentally misses the stakes of what we are witnessing, because one side is advocating for mass denaturalization and ethnic scapegoating, while the other is desperately trying to preserve constitutional democracy. Now let me tell you what is happening right now in Minnesota as Trump's rhetoric metastasizes into concrete policy, because this is not just talk, this is becoming operational reality. Ilhan Omar is demanding that the Trump administration explain its ICE operation in her congressional district, which she claims is in direct response to Trump's racist comments after Trump announced his immigration crackdown would expand into Minnesota and stated that Somalis contribute nothing to the United States. Think about that for a moment. Think about what it means that a sitting president can target a specific ethnic community in a specific congressional district, represented by a woman he has explicitly called garbage and threatened with deportation, and then deploy federal immigration enforcement agents to that exact location in what appears to be a calculated act of political intimidation. The administration is also considering revoking temporary protected status for approximately 750 Somali refugees, some of whom have lived in the United States for almost 3 decades, with current protections extended through March 17, 2026, which would render legal residents suddenly deportable, their entire lives upended, their families torn apart, all because of Trump's unhealthy obsession as Omar herself has characterized it. The denaturalization threat looms over everything like a sword of Damocles, because this represents something genuinely new and terrifying in American politics, the suggestion that citizenship itself is conditional and revocable for naturalized Americans who displease the president. Throughout the 20th century, the Supreme Court issued several rulings setting a high bar for denaturalization, requiring a heavy burden for rescinding citizenship in a 1943 case involving ties to the Communist Party, and warning in 1946 against the use of denaturalization as a ready instrument for political persecutions. But these protections have remained in place until now, as Trump has directed Justice Department lawyers to maximally pursue denaturalization proceedings. Between 1907 and 1967, more than 22,000 Americans lost their citizenship based on political affiliations, race, and gender, with President Wilson's administration denaturalizing German and Asian-born citizens during World War I, along with anarchists and people who spoke out against the war, and denaturalization of citizens from Germany, Italy, and Japan, intensifying during World War II, which is the dark history that Trump and Miller are explicitly seeking to resurrect, weaponizing the machinery of citizenship revocation against political enemies and disfavored minorities in ways that would have been unthinkable just a decade ago. And here is the part that should absolutely terrify anyone who cares about democratic norms or constitutional governance, because Trump and his supporters laid the groundwork for these executive orders over a decade through dangerous speech, which is rhetoric that increases the risk that its audience will commit or condone violence or serious harm against a group, and the rhetorical threats Trump employed during his campaign are directly echoed in the titles and content of his executive orders. These executive orders were made possible by the dangerous speech that came before them. They were not responses to real-world crises but part of a plan, many ready to go on day one, with the fact that many were issued immediately after Trump took office, underscoring the role dangerous speech played as a strategy for justifying and enabling policy change. This is the authoritarian playbook operating in textbook fashion. First, you dehumanize the target population through relentless propaganda and othering. Then you manufacture or exaggerate crises involving that population. Then you deploy state power against them while your supporters cheer, because you have successfully convinced them that cruelty is necessary for their protection. When people are convinced that their lives or families or the future of their country is under threat, they become more willing to condone violence and repression in the name of protection, and research shows that feelings of chaos or societal breakdown drive support for authoritarian leaders who capitalize on fear by portraying migrants, minority groups, and political opponents as existential threats. Let us talk about Ilhan Omar herself for a moment, because her story is everything that America claims to be about, and everything that Trump's America seeks to destroy. Omar fled from civil war in Somalia when she was 8 years old, arrived in the United States a few years later, and became a citizen in 2000 at 17 years old, spending 4 years in a Kenyan refugee camp before finding safety in Minnesota, where she would eventually become the first Somali American member of Congress and one of the first Muslim women elected to Congress. In the 2024 election, Omar won with a commanding 74% of the vote, which tells you everything you need to know about how her constituents view her service and her representation. But Trump does not care about democratic legitimacy or the will of voters. He cares about punishing dissent and making an example out of a woman who refuses to be silenced or intimidated. Omar called Trump's rant vile and said it was no surprise because he has trafficked in racism, in xenophobia, in bigotry, in Islamophobia for as long as he has held office, and she responded to his latest attacks by saying, "His obsession with me is creepy. I hope he gets the help he desperately needs," which is both dignified and defiant in the face of unrelenting harassment from the most powerful office in the world. But here is what makes this whole grotesque spectacle even more enraging, even more hypocritical, even more revealing of the white supremacist logic at the heart of Trump's immigration politics, because Omar points out that Trump is fixated on immigrants, particularly those who are not white, noting, "He seems to have a real obsession with anyone who is not of European descent. You don't hear him talking about the accent of his wife, and the fact that she came here as an immigrant." The double standard is not a bug. It is the entire feature of how racism operates in American immigration policy. It is the reason why Trump can marry multiple immigrant women from Eastern Europe, while simultaneously demonizing refugees from Africa and the Middle East. It is the reason why Trump can marry multiple immigrant women from Eastern Europe, while simultaneously demonizing refugees from Africa and the Middle East. It is the reason why Trump can marry multiple immigrant women from East. Trump's new travel ban impacts 19 countries and potentially blocks over 125,000 people each year from coming to the United States, targeting predominantly Muslim and black nations, while European immigration faces no such scrutiny. The original Muslim ban imposed travel restrictions on Iran, Iraq, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, Syria, and Yemen. Trump's first travel ban was labeled a Muslim ban by Trump and his aides as well as his critics, since the ban mostly impacted countries with predominantly Muslim populations, suspending refugee resettlement for 120 days and banning Syrian refugees indefinitely, and the fact that Trump is now promising to bring it back bigger and more comprehensive is a direct assault on religious freedom and racial equality. The Somali community in Minnesota has become a particular target of this racist obsession, and we need to understand the scope and scale of what is happening, because there are about 80,000 Somalis in Minnesota. In 2024, about 260,000 people of Somali descent were living in the United States according to the Census Bureau, and approximately 73% of Somali immigrants are naturalized citizens according to the Census Bureau, which means that the vast majority of the people Trump is attacking are American citizens with every right to be here and to participate in our democracy. Melvin Carter, the mayor of St. Paul, called Trump's comments racist, Islamophobic, and xenophobic, stating, "When the president responds with division and racism, it's un-American and against everything we stand for," which should be the baseline bipartisan response, but which has been met with deafening silence from most Republicans who have long since abandoned any pretense of standing up to Trump's most egregious abuses. And let me be crystal clear about the fraud allegations, because context matters desperately here, and Trump is deliberately obscuring it for maximum political effect. Yes, there have been convictions for COVID relief fraud in Minnesota. Yes, some of those convicted are Somali immigrants. Yes, the amounts involved are substantial. But Omar herself said on CBS News that it's unfair to blame the entire community for the actions of a relative few, and that most Somalis are angry about the fraud because this also has an impact on Somalis, because we are also taxpayers in Minnesota. Almost every single threat outlined in the authoritarian playbook for 2025 has precedent in the first Trump administration, which means we have a preview of what a second Trump term would look like, and it involves the systematic dismantling of democratic guardrails, the weaponization of federal law enforcement against political enemies, the purging of ideological opponents from government, and the creation of a permission structure for mass human rights violations against vulnerable populations. The threat of denaturalization hangs over millions of Americans like a nightmare-made policy, because President-elect Trump has doubled down on his campaign promise of deporting 15 million people, including some who are already naturalized U.S. citizens, and while it may be virtually impossible to implement Trump's grandiose ambitions due to logistical and financial challenges, his administration will still devastate countless lives, including those who thought their citizenship was forever. Miller has declared he will pursue denaturalization to go after people who have been citizens for years or decades based on suspicions about purported fraud on their naturalization applications, with individuals stripped of citizenship then subject to deportation, and thousands of immigrants naturalized as minors, through a parent's application, may have their citizenship annulled through no fault of their own, and many American-born children might find their citizenship in doubt if their parents are denaturalized given Trump's pledge to end birthright citizenship. This is generational destruction we are talking about, the unmaking of families and communities, and entire lives built over decades, all in service of a white nationalist vision of America that seeks to expel anyone who does not fit the narrow definition of who belongs. Omar herself has been remarkably resilient in the face of this sustained campaign of hatred and intimidation, though the toll is undeniable and terrifying. In a New York Times opinion column, Omar noted that Trump's attacks have carried real consequences, writing, "When Mr. Trump maligns me, it increases the number of death threats that my family, staff members, and I receive, which is the direct result of stochastic terrorism. The way Trump's rhetoric creates a climate where his most extreme followers feel licensed to act on their violent impulses." Omar warned that this kind of hateful rhetoric and this level of dehumanizing can lead to dangerous actions by people who listen to the president, which is not speculation, but documented historical fact about how genocidal violence begins, through the systematic dehumanization of target populations by authority figures who give permission for atrocity. And we must confront the complicity of the Republican Party and conservative media ecosystem in enabling and amplifying these authoritarian impulses, because Trump does not operate in isolation. He operates with the active support or cowardly silence of elected officials who know better but refuse to act. Critics expressed concern about Trump's comments and how they're being received by the GOP, with experts noting that all the time in authoritarian states you see branding of some faction of the political opposition, not as loyal opposition but as enemy opposition. And while the U.S. has history with this, like Nixon and McCarthy, there is a key distinction because Nixon and McCarthy were ostracized by their peers, whereas this one is really different because Trump's got this mass movement and a set of people who are willing to fight for him. The institutional resistance that prevented full authoritarian consolidation in the past has largely evaporated, replaced by a Republican Party that has become a cult of personality organized entirely around loyalty to one man and his grievances. The fraud allegations themselves deserve rigorous investigation and prosecution where appropriate, but they are being weaponized in service of a much broader and more sinister agenda. The New York Times published an investigation on fraud allegedly perpetrated by Somali immigrants against Minnesota's social services system, with law enforcement officials claiming that over the past 5 years, fraud took root in pockets of Minnesota's Somali diaspora, and critics reportedly said that some alleged fraud continued because state officials under walls didn't want to alienate the Somali population, which creates a politically convenient narrative for Trump to exploit. But the solution to fraud is prosecution of the guilty individuals, not collective punishment of an entire ethnic and religious community. A wealth of research shows that immigrants commit fewer crimes than U.S.-born people, with a 2023 Stanford University study finding that immigrants are 60% less likely to be incarcerated than their U.S.-born counterparts, which completely demolishes the racist premise underlying Trump's entire anti-immigrant agenda. What is happening to Ilhan Omar and the Somali community is a warning and a preview of what Trump intends to do to anyone who opposes him or represents a demographic he views as threatening to his vision of white Christian America. This is all part of a broader effort to target the rights of immigrants and redefine who is an American, starting on Inauguration Day with the effort to eliminate birthright citizenship, and it's part of efforts to reverse what top administration officials have called a conspiracy to alter the makeup of the electorate, which is white supremacist great replacement theory, given the force of federal policy. The director of U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, Joseph Edlow, accused previous administrations of admitting immigrants to make them all citizens and then spread them out to try to change demographics, which is an explicit articulation of the paranoid racist fantasy that immigration is a democratic plot to dilute white political power, and this is the worldview now directing federal immigration policy. The stakes could not be higher, and the moment could not be more urgent, because majority support is not needed to carry out massive violations of human rights. It just takes a powerful group committed to action and passivity on the part of most other people, which is the lesson of every atrocity of the 20th century, and which should haunt everyone who is tempted to look away or assume that American exceptionalism will somehow prevent the worst outcomes. By weaponizing fear, inventing crises, and redefining enemies, Trump has laid the rhetorical groundwork for sweeping executive actions that would have been unthinkable just a decade ago, and recognizing the role that dangerous speech plays in this shift is essential to resisting it, because if civil society does not challenge the false narratives that frame repression as rescue, there is a risk that the executive orders will create very real crises born not of migrant invasions or internal enemies, but of unchecked authoritarian power. This is fascism. This is what it looks like in its early stages before the worst horrors fully materialize. This is the test that every generation faces, when democratic norms come under assault by demagogues who promise order and prosperity in exchange for the scapegoating and elimination of unpopular minorities. We are watching a sitting president openly threaten to strip citizenship from a member of Congress because she criticized him and represents a community he despises. We are watching him deploy federal law enforcement to target specific ethnic neighborhoods for maximum political effect. We are watching him lay the groundwork for mass denaturalization and deportation of naturalized citizens who have committed no crime beyond existing while Muslim or black or immigrant. The playbook is not subtle. The historical parallels are not ambiguous. The danger is not theoretical, and the time for equivocation or both sidesism or benefit of the doubt is long past. What Trump is doing to Ilhan Omar and the Somali community is a crime against democratic values and human dignity, and if we do not resist it with every tool at our disposal, if we do not organize and mobilize and vote and protest and litigate and speak truth to power at every opportunity, then we will watch the unthinkable become routine and the unspeakable become policy, and the machinery of oppression grind forward until it comes for us too, because that is how authoritarianism works. It starts with the most vulnerable and least popular targets, and expands outward until no one is safe, and the republic we inherited lies in ruins. The fight is now, the stakes are existential, and history will not forgive those who looked away.